How's everyone doing? It's James Webster, the Planning Policy Manager here at Wilton District Council, and I'm joined today on the Planning Pulse by
Samantha Pryor.
Brilliant. You just want to speak about your role here now at the council?
Yeah, sure. So I have recently joined the planning policy team as one of the team leaders, primarily helping work on growth related to the new local plan. I was in development management for a few years before that. So yeah, nice transition across.
Absolutely, and as Craig Steenhoff's also arrived as one of the other team leaders who's dealing with more of the natural environment and other bits, so that was very much welcome and supporting us through the local plans, so that's very good. We're here today to talk about neighbourhood plans. We've had three adopted very recently, as just in last month, in the middle of last month, we had three plans adopted at Ninfield, Horham and East Hoadley with Hallen. So I didn't know if we wanted to go through just talk around what that means for us, Sam. So I don't know if we want to ask a few questions around the process first.
Yeah, no, it'd be good to know more. Could you first off, James, tell us about the overall process for neighbourhood plans? So the stages that are involved and how it might reach adoption.
Yeah, so there's quite a few. So parishes come to us to ask about what they would like to do within their parishes in the planning terms, and the first thing they usually do is hold a meeting with them to explore what they feel can work for them and how those policies may work. We then have something called a Regulation 14 process, which is where the parish councils develop their neighbourhood plan to a point where they're sort of happy with the initial draft. They do a consultation on that plan for usually 6 to 8 weeks, but it can be longer. Um, we comment back, so as the council's representative on the local plan and on planning policies, we come back to them with our response to their sort of policies. But in that process, we are speaking to them pretty regularly around those sort of issues. Once it's got through that stage and the residents of that parish have come back to us, it then goes to a second draft stage called the Regulation 16. That's one that the council, so Wilton District Council, consults on that neighbourhood plan. So we hopefully the parish at that stage, and in most cases they have a look at what the council have said, what developers have said, what the county council have said, and we'll come back with a sort of draft, better version of the plan than they've already done for the Regulation 14. Once it gets through that process, it's then the interesting part of a examination process. So they have to submit to an independent examiner that's appointed on the behalf of Wilton District Council and the parish council involved. So we usually come to a joint, sort of response to that and hope that we get the right person in. And it's very similar to a sort of it could be through a written representation period, which is usually what happens. So the inspector asks questions around that neighbourhood plan, and then we come back with answers. That's parish council, developers, third party, and us. Or they could be if it's more involved, they can have a hearing process for that as well, but that's quite rare. We've only had one of those at the council so far at Head and Line. After that stage, if it's all gone really well, we then take it to a decision then to referendum, which is the electoral part of it, which you may have seen. Residents may have seen a few referendums that have come up recently for those neighbourhood plans that have been adopted. So it goes through that process. At least 51% of those, or just over 50% of those parish residents have to agree that the plan should be adopted as that referendum. If that's the case, then we then take that plan to full council, where it's then adopted or made, is what they're called.
Okay. It's quite a long process then.
It is, yeah. So
Quite involved.
that can take 2 or 3 years minimum, probably in most cases. So it's an involved process.
And you mentioned there about different roles and different parties being involved. What's the specific role of the parish and town council?
So the parish are the ones that are creating the plan, or the town council, and they're the ones that have got the ideas. It's usually and we celebrate the groups that have recently gone through that neighbourhood plan process, because it's a long process, like you said, and they're usually volunteers that spend a lot of time looking at that parish and reviewing what policies they would like for that plan. So they've got the overarching role, like we would with a local plan, I guess, and we can then sort of actually think about what policies are needed for that parish and then take it to us. So they've got a very important role in dealing with that and going through that process. It's usually non-planners, but there are sometimes the odd experienced planner that comes into some of those groups, but in the main, the non-planners that are involved in that process.
So if they do the stage that we would normally do, what do Wilden District Council do?
Yeah, so we provide the advice, and we've got a legal duty to do that. So we're legally advised by the government to help parishes and town councils with their neighbourhood plan. We comment on it really and try and make things work. Obviously, we have got planning expertise here, so we can help sort of iron out issues around the wording of policies to get it to how that parish council wants it. And also, sometimes we have to say, oh, it might not be quite right, and the examiner might go, no, it's it's not quite right, and we need to go through that process so we can advise on our experience. We've had 7 neighbourhood plans now through the process, so we know quite a lot of what the examiners are looking for, so we can help them with that process as well.
Okay, and you mentioned there about examination. The 3 most recently adopted neighbourhood plans all went through that process. Could you tell us a bit more about what's involved?
Yeah, so we have it's usually a very experienced planner or in another profession, maybe a barrister or a lawyer that has either worked in the planning inspectorate before for local plans and is a planning inspector, or is very experienced in that field, and they will obviously be impartial completely. They're usually from a different part of the country, and they look at that particular plan in its context, review all of the representations that have been made on that plan, and then come to sort of a overall report around what that plan should look like, and they can adjust policies, they can amend things and go through that sort of process. And as I say, it's usually done through written representations, but it can be done through a public hearing session as well.
And then I think you mentioned it goes to referendum.
Yes, it does. Yeah, so that's the electoral process. So all parishioners of that particular parish that are about to make a adopted neighbourhood plan can vote on it. They've got a democratic right to vote on it, much like you would do for a local council general election. It's exactly the same process. So you put a ballot in your box and say yes. The main question for that referendum is whether you would want that neighbourhood plan to be used in determining planning application. So that's the question that's asked, and you can either say yes or no. Obviously, if it says no, that plan won't get adopted and it won't go any further. If the parishioners say yes, then it will go through to us as the final stage of full council approval.
Excellent.
Yeah, I've got a few questions for you as well, Sam, as particularly around post-adoption of a neighbourhood plan. So here there's been, as I say, we've spoken before, 3 recently made neighbourhood plans in Horham, Ninfield, East Hoathly with Halland in October. What does the neighbourhood plan do, and what does it mean for planning applications in those parishes?
So I think you mentioned there about local plans, and I think the way to think about a neighbourhood plan is that it is very similar to a local plan, but it's at a really local neighbourhood level. So it's applicable for an area that's designated for the neighbourhood plan process. It's got policies in there, aspirations, things that the local neighbourhood and community really want to see achieved that are specific to their area. So something you might see in there is design codes, for example. They can be applicable to different parts of the neighbourhood. You can have local policies around things like dark skies. That's been quite popular in the neighbourhood plans that have been drafted. Other areas, there's been things like car-free developments that have been looked at. So yeah, I think anything that's really important to that parish or that town area is included. And when it is and that plan's adopted, it's part of the development plan. So it's given full weight in terms of planning application, assessment and consideration.
Brilliant. And I also thought that when those parishes adopt a neighbourhood plan, would they actually gain more through the community infrastructure levy? And how does that work?
Indeed. So the SIL regulations set out that in an area without a neighbourhood plan, you're looking at 15% of the contributions that are made. That rises to 25% in an area with a neighbourhood plan and is uncapped. So it is a real area where that local parish or town council are seeing income come forward from development that's come ahead. And there is actually a page on our website that sets out quite nicely what SIL receipts have gone to each parish and town council. And you can see there perhaps the difference in those that have got an adopted neighbourhood plan.
And when Wilden District Council planning officers make recommendations on planning applications, how much weight can actually be attached to those neighbourhood plan policies? I know it's a tricky question, isn't it? That one. So
It's one similar to the local plan process, that the weight you attach changes as you go through the process of adoption. So when you've got to the point where you've had the examiner's report come back, you've been through the examination, you're attaching significant weight to it. And then when you've got to the point past the referendum and that's been passed, you're attaching full weight. So at that point, at both those stages, you'll see officer reports start to cite relevant paragraphs and policies of the neighbourhood plan. You'll see appeal decisions, you'll see inspectors' reports start quoting references from it.
and what happens once the Wilden local plan is adopted? So our district plan, will neighbourhood plans have just been made become out of date? And what's the sort of review mechanism around neighbourhood plans?
So there's no requirement to review a neighbourhood plan, but you're quite right that it forms part of the development plan in its entirety. So when another document in the development plan is updated or adopted, you might find that policies within the neighbourhood plan are no longer applicable because they're superseded by others. So that might happen with strategic policies that come forward in the local plan. But at that stage, there is the option to review. There's that option to review at any time. I think it's always worth taking stock, seeing how the policies have been implemented in the neighbourhood plan. Are there things that have changed in the neighbourhood that you want to take account of? So yeah, there is the ability to review them as and when needed.
Yeah, and I think that's actually become apparent now because have been parishes. So there's 3 parish plans that were adopted a little while ago, and Hurstman Zoo, Hurstman and Henline, they're all sort of looking at potentially reviewing their plan at this stage. So yeah, that is the other thing we can do. Well, thank you very much, Sam, for that. Thanks for spending time with me today and to talk around neighbourhood plans on the podcast. It's really been helpful to understand. I hope the listeners have found it helpful as well in terms of what neighbourhood plans mean. It's a goodbye from me, and it's a goodbye from Sam. Thank you for joining us today on Planning Pulse.